The news that Rob Reiner and Michelle had passed away after being murdered by their own biological son spread on a gloomy morning, making Hollywood seem to pause in a suffocating breath. The man who had spent his entire life telling stories about love, friendship, and kindness ended his life at the hands of the very son he loved most. Amid that shock, Billy Crystal's reaction left everyone stunned. As soon as he received the news, Billy was said to have rushed to the house in Brentwood, standing frozen before the familiar door before covering his face and breaking down in tears. "I don't know how to live in a world without Rob," he cried out in despair. Many years earlier, Rob had once half-joked, half-serious, saying to him, "If one day I go first, remember to stand up and say a few words for me." Back then, they laughed. Now that sentence had become the most painful promise of Billy's life. At the private funeral that followed, Billy Crystal fulfilled that promise. He stood up before the family and the closest friends, his voice trembling, every word seeming to be pulled from memory and loss. So, what truly happened at Reiner's funeral? Who was there? Who cried silently? And what did Billy Crystal say when he had to stand up to bid farewell to the greatest friend of his life? On December 14, 2025, all of Hollywood was shaken as news spread that legendary director Rob Reiner, 78, and his wife, photographer Michelle Singer Reiner, 70, had been found dead at their home in the Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. The bodies were discovered with multiple sharp force injuries and were determined to be the result of homicide. Their daughter, Romy Reiner, was the first to discover her parents' bodies after a massage therapist raised the alarm when unable to reach them. Police quickly launched an investigation, and the perpetrator was identified as their youngest son, Nick Reiner, who was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. The official cause of death was announced as multiple stab wounds from a sharp weapon, and Nick could face the death penalty or life imprisonment without parole. At the first court appearance, Nick's attorney requested a delay of the hearing, which the judge approved. In the face of that family tragedy, the Reiner family decided to hold a private funeral reserved only for immediate family members and their closest friends. The family emphasized that this was a first farewell only for those closest, as they were in a state of shock and profound grief. Everything took place on December 19th, exactly 5 days after the tragic deaths of Rob and Michelle Reiner. Their funeral was held on a small beach in Malibu, a place where the two had once dreamed of watching their final sunrise together. The setting was quiet, with only the steady sound of waves and the sea breeze carrying pain and final goodbyes. The sky was gray, the clouds low, yet it held a desolate beauty, as if trying to comfort the two souls who had just left this world. Their daughter Romy took responsibility for contacting each friend and family member to invite them to the funeral. She called each person herself, her voice trembling but determined, trying to convey the importance of the gathering. "Everyone, my parents want us to meet one last time at the beach they loved. Please come so we can see them off together," she said, each word seeming to draw tears directly from her heart. When calling Billy Crystal, Romy choked up. "My dad wanted to return to the sea. We're following our parents' wishes." Billy replied only in a warm, steady voice. "Your parents would be so proud of you, Romy." Romy continued calling Larry David, Albert Brooks, and Norman Lear, longtime friends of her father. She called Barack and Michelle Obama, who had been frequent guests at the Reiner home. Each call was brief but filled with pain. At times, she had to stop mid-sentence to cry before continuing. "Only the closest people, just as my parents wanted." While Romy connected with everyone, her brother Jake handled the logistics. He took care of everything, From arranging seating, lighting candles, placing white flowers, to creating a space private enough for people to mourn without disturbance. He moved back and forth, his hands shaking, but his eyes resolute. We have to honor our parents' wishes. They wanted peace, no noise, no media. On the morning of the funeral, the small beach was covered in a thin mist, the faint light of dawn filtering through, making the wet sand shimmer like tears left behind from the night before. The atmosphere was quiet, but emotionally heavy. Every footprint pressed into the cold sand, as if people were walking across memories already past. The closest friends, longtime companions, colleagues, and family members arrived one by one, standing around the ceremonial area, exchanging silent embraces, red-rimmed eyes, and strained smiles. No one spoke. Every step, every deep breath was soaked in grief, as if everyone understood that this was the day of the final farewell. Each guest carried a memory, a personal story of Rob and Michelle. Some brought photographs. Others held books Rob had once signed, and many simply stood still, letting tears and memories speak for them. The beach became a vast memorial room without walls, filled only with waves, wind, and heavy hearts. Barack and Michelle Obama stood beside an elderly Norman Lear. Larry David spoke quietly with Albert Brooks. Martin Short put an arm around Jake Rayner in comfort. Romy moved among the guests, eyes red, but still forcing herself to smile and thank each one. When the sun rose a little higher, people began looking toward the path leading down to the beach. Billy Crystal was the last to arrive. He and Janice walked slowly from afar. Billy wore a simple white shirt, sunglasses hiding eyes that had cried too much in recent days. Janice held her husband's hand tightly, walking beside him like an inseparable anchor. In his left hand, Billy Crystal held a small keepsake that everyone immediately recognized. An old navy blue baseball cap, faded with time, bearing the New York Yankees logo on the front. It was the very cap Rob Reiner had worn throughout the 1980s, when the two worked together and laughed on the sets of The Princess Bride and countless other projects. Rob had once joked that the cap was his lucky charm, and Billy had kept it since the last time they met a few years earlier. As Billy approached, people instinctively stepped aside. He stopped in front of Romy and Jake, gently placing the cap into Romy's hands. His voice was soft. "Your dad told me to hold on to this for him. Said that one day he'd need it to remember the happy days." On the beach, Romy and Jake stood still, holding hands tightly, looking at Billy with eyes filled with tears and gratitude. "He was always like that," Romy whispered to Jake. "Always bringing warmth even when the pain was overwhelming." In that moment, everything seemed to stop, leaving only quiet sorrow and eternal love. Billy then silently placed his hand on the two coffins, whispering something only he and Rob and Michelle could hear. Janice stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, yet offering a faint smile as she looked at the old cap in Romy's hands. However, the most emotional moment for everyone present came when Billy stepped up to the podium. Everything seemed to freeze as all listened to the final tribute from the soulmate who had shared an entire lifetime with Rob Reiner. Billy Crystal stood still for a long time before stepping forward. He squeezed his wife's hand, then let go, as if knowing that from this moment on, he had to stand alone with his pain before everyone. His shoulders sagged, his steps slow on the sand. And when he turned to face the audience, many people broke down immediately, because Billy's face was no longer that of a comedian, but of a man who had just lost half of his life. He placed both hands on the podium, lowered his head, took a deep breath. Yet his voice still trembled. "I've thought a lot about what I should say today," Billy began, then paused. "And then I realized There are no words that are enough when your best friend is no longer sitting in the front row to laugh, to tease you, to say, "Hey, Billy, don't take everything so seriously." A choked sob echoed somewhere along the beach. After looking at the two flower-covered coffins, then down at the familiar faces seated below, his voice continued. Rob and I met in 1975 on the set of All in the Family. We were cast as best friends, even though we'd never met before. After the first day of filming, we looked at each other and said, "This feels great. Why don't we just become best friends in real life, too?" And just like that, 50 years passed. After that first milestone, their friendship quickly moved beyond work. They began meeting outside filming hours, having dinners together, talking about career worries, family, and insecurities the outside world never saw. Billy once said that Rob was the first person who made him feel he didn't need to perform in real life. From that point on, they were no longer just two actors working together, but true soulmates. He spoke of long nights after filming when they sat together talking about movies, family, and fears they didn't dare voice aloud. Rob always told me, "If you're scared, just say it. We'll laugh at it." And strangely, Billy gently shook his head. Every time, the fear really did shrink. In the audience, some wiped away tears, others bowed their heads low. The early 1980s marked a second milestone when Rob began his directing career, and Billy became one of the people he trusted most. This is Spinal Tap in 1984 and The Princess Bride in 1987 were not just film projects, but moments where they challenged each other. Rob gave Billy creative freedom, and Billy understood Rob so well that a single glance was enough to know what to do next. The biggest milestone came in 1989 with When Harry Met Sally. The role of Harry Burns was not only the role of a lifetime for Billy Crystal, but also proof of the absolute trust between the two men. Rob had considered many other actors, but in the end, he chose Billy. Not because of fame, but because he understood Billy deeply enough to know that the character needed a real heart, not a perfect performance. Billy continued. At the first test screening of When Harry Met Sally, we sat in the very back row, holding hands tightly. When the audience erupted in laughter, Rob turned to me and whispered, "We did it, Billy. That's a moment I'll carry with me forever." After that success, their friendship never faded with time or fame. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, they continued their habit of regular meetings, attending premieres, awards ceremonies, and family dinners together. Billy grew close to the entire Reiner family, especially Rob's father, Rob Reiner, a bond that pushed their friendship beyond the personal into something truly familial. He smiled sadly, his voice tightening. Rob was the smartest, funniest, kindest person I've ever known. He could fix a script on the spot, make everything more logical, funnier, yet he was always humble. I admired him from day one, and I never stopped. A somber milestone came in 2020 when Rob Reiner passed away. Billy grieved not just like losing a mentor, but like losing a blood relative. In that time, Rob frequently called Billy to share his feelings, and their bond grew even stronger, without needing many words, just being there for each other. It was a kind of friendship that transcended language. In Rob's final years, they still appeared together, still laughed, still teased each other like the young men they once were. Billy paused, then mentioned Michelle, his voice breaking. And Michelle. Michelle was the one who made Rob the best version of himself. She was always behind us, quiet, warm. I can't think of Rob without thinking of Michelle. They were one. He lowered his head, placing a hand over his chest, as if the pain in his heart was unbearable. He turned to Romy and Jake. You too, Billy said softly. Your parents lived decent, meaningful lives. And today, the way you've brought them back to the sea, that's the most beautiful thing you could have done for them. Romy broke down. Jake held his sister's hand tightly, eyes red, but never leaving Billy. Billy bowed deeply, tears falling onto the sand. In the audience, almost no one could hold back their tears. After Billy Crystal stepped away from the podium, the beach sank into a long, suffocating silence. No one applauded. There was only the steady sound of waves, like a heartbeat, struggling to keep going for hearts exhausted by grief. Everyone understood that the words just spoken did not close the ceremony. They only opened a chain of further goodbyes, each carrying a piece of Rob Reiner that the speaker had held in their life. Meg Ryan was the next to step up. She stood for a long time, hands clasped, eyes red, but trying to stay composed. Rob taught me that love doesn't need to be perfect, she said softly, her voice breaking midway. He just said, let them talk to each other like real people. And that changed my life. In the audience, many cried, remembering the love stories Rob had told with such rare tenderness. Stephen King stepped up next, tall and thin, his face heavy with grief. He didn't say much, only looked out at the sea before bowing his head. Rob was one of the few people who could see light in the darkest stories I write, King said slowly. He wasn't afraid of sadness. He didn't avoid fear. He just asked me one question. Are we being honest? His voice trembled. And Rob was always honest. Kathy Bates took the podium with swollen eyes, gripping her crumpled speech. Rob believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself, she said, tears falling uncontrollably. He said, go a little further, Kathy. I'm here. She paused, taking a deep breath. I went that far because of him. Many lowered their heads, unable to look straight ahead under the weight of emotion. Albert Brooks stepped up, nearly exhausted. He tried to smile, but the smile quickly faded. Rob and I laughed together for almost our entire lives, he said. And the most painful thing today is, I don't know who I'm supposed to laugh with anymore. A sob rippled through the crowd like a breaking wave. Martin Short was the last. He held no paper, simply stood there, hands trembling slightly. We talk a lot about Rob's talent, he said hoarsely, but what made me love him was his kindness. He listened. He remembered your name. He stayed until the very end. Then he whispered as if to himself, Rob, you made this world better, and now it's emptier without you. Finally, the one who closed everything was Romy. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but steady, reading the words her parents had written in their will. Live well. Love one another. And don't forget to laugh every day. We are leaving, but we hope you will continue to see the light in dark days. Each sentence seemed to pull a heartbeat from her chest, making everyone on the beach ache, while also feeling the deep love Rob and Michelle left behind. Jake stood beside her, managing every small detail, making sure the candles didn't go out, the flowers weren't blown away by the wind, and the sound of the waves continued to cover any unwanted noise. He didn't speak much, but his eyes shimmered with a deep sorrow, a pain beyond words. Occasionally, he whispered to Romy, everything will be okay. We're keeping our promise to them. When the last person stepped away from the podium, no one else stood up. The funeral ended not with a grand ritual, but with a collective silence, tight embraces, tears falling onto the sand, eyes turned toward the sea. Everyone understood they had witnessed not just the farewell of a great director, but the goodbye of an entire generation to a man who had lived with profound kindness. Someone whispered, "They truly left behind all the good in our lives." The beach slowly grew quiet, leaving only the sound of waves and wind. The attendees departed, each carrying in their hearts the image of Rob and Michelle, an image of eternal love, of a family torn apart, yet still holding on to its final wholeness through a last wish. That day, on that small beach, tragedy and peace intertwined, and the two souls departed in the arms of those who loved them most. Not only did it leave the entire funeral drowned in tears, but even before the farewell speeches, there was a moment few people knew about. On the morning of the 14th, when the news of Rob Reiner and Michelle first leaked out, when everything was still chaotic and no one yet understood what had happened, Billy Crystal appeared in front of their house before the world had time to name that pain. On December 14, 2025, just a few hours after the bodies of Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, were discovered at their home in Brentwood, Los Angeles, Billy Crystal and his wife Janice rushed to the scene. At that time, Romy Reiner had called Billy in panic immediately after finding her parents, prompting him and Janice to drive straight to their close friend's house. Billy and Janice arrived separately from Larry David, another close friend of Rob. But all three were present at the scene that Sunday evening, while the area was still tightly sealed off by police. Video footage captured the moment Billy Crystal, 77, stepped inside the police barrier with his wife. He looked pale, his face showing profound shock, repeatedly wiping away tears with the back of his hand. Janice held tightly onto her husband's hand the entire time, trying to support him as he appeared barely able to stand. A witness near the scene recalled, "He looked like he was about to break down, and he was only there for a short while." Billy stayed at the scene for only about 30 minutes, said nothing to the press, simply embraced Janice in silence, and left with a look of overwhelming anguish. After that, Billy stood up, turned his back on the house one last time before leaving, as if afraid that if he looked for even one more second, he would never find the courage to walk away. As the car pulled off, Billy stared straight ahead, his eyes hollow. The friend who had walked beside him through nearly his entire life was gone. And from that moment on, Billy Crystal understood that there are roles that never end, because this pain he would have to carry for the rest of his life. A few days later, in a joint statement honoring Rob, Billy and close friends such as Larry David and Albert Brooks expressed boundless grief, calling Rob a master storyteller and saying he left behind a devastating void that nothing could ever fill. As for the perpetrator, Nick Reiner was described as having suffered from a severe mental illness, specifically schizophrenia, with symptoms that became increasingly pronounced in the short time before the tragedy occurred. Adjustments to his medication, which were expected to help stabilize his condition, instead caused his mental state to become more disordered, with erratic emotions, fragmented thinking, and increasingly uncontrollable behavior. Those around him noticed that Nick was no longer himself, as if he were slowly slipping out of reality with no one able to pull him back in time. Alongside the mental illness was a long history of substance addiction and old fractures that had never fully healed. Multiple attempts at rehabilitation, efforts to rebuild his life, and the family's persistent support had once offered fragile hope. But when mental illness overlapped with addiction, Nick seemed trapped in a spiral where reason no longer had the strength to govern his actions. Legally, Nick faced extraordinarily serious criminal charges, and the judicial process was described as slow, heavy, and painstakingly cautious at every step. If convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, he could face life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, or, in certain exceptional circumstances, the death penalty. Depending on the decisions of the prosecution and the jury, when considering aggravating factors in the case. However, his mental condition became a key factor, forcing the justice system to consider not only his actions, but also his capacity for awareness and criminal responsibility at the time of the incident. Forensic psychiatric evaluations played a decisive role in determining the direction of the case. The funeral concluded not with a grand ceremony, but with a deeply human silence. The words Billy Crystal spoke did not attempt to summarize a career, nor did they try to soften the loss, but instead left behind a very real feeling. Some people depart quietly, yet the void they leave behind is so deep and long that even time cannot fill it. Rob Reiner was bid farewell in the very way he had lived, simple, kind, and full of love. In every reddened gaze, every tight embrace, every choked pause between speeches, people recognized that he was not only a great director, but a person who had touched many lives in quiet, yet enduring ways. And perhaps what remains after everything is not pure pain, but a quiet question that Billy posed on behalf of everyone. How will we live so that when we leave, the memory of us is still warm enough for others to want to keep? And what about you? What do you remember most about Rob Reiner? A film, a line of dialogue, or a deeply personal moment that touched you? Leave a comment below to share and remember together. If you find this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future pieces. Thank you for staying until the very last lines. Your listening is also a way of paying tribute.